Hello, welcome to the Haunted Storybook. Before we get to the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Story 1. Julian's car rumbled over the gravel road, headlights cutting through the mist that clung stubbornly to the winding forest path. The air smelled of pine, moss, and something else, something faintly metallic. He rolled down the window and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The GPS had given up a mile ago. All he had was a hand-drawn map mailed to him weeks earlier, along with a handwritten invitation. Hollow Pines Retreat, disconnect to reconnect. One guest at a time. He was burned out. The city, the noise, the pressure, all of it had piled too high. His therapist recommended time away from everything. This strange little retreat sounded perfect. The trees leaned in close, like spectators, as the road narrowed further. Just when Julian thought he'd have to turn back, he saw the cabin, tucked between two massive, black-barked pines. A porch light flickered weakly. He parked, grabbed his bag, and stepped out into the chill. The cabin's door creaked open before he touched it. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. Only silence. And the feeling that something had just slipped behind one of the trees. Julian stepped inside, flicking on the light switch beside the door. The bulb overhead buzzed to life, casting a pale glow over the small entryway. The air inside was cool and musty, thick with the scent of old cedar and burned-out candles. The interior was cozy but sparse, a stone fireplace, a threadbare couch, a small kitchen, and a spiral staircase leading to the loft. A writing desk sat beneath the front window, where a leather-bound book lay open with a fountain pen resting on its spine. Julian approached and saw the header written in looping script. Hollow Pines Guest Book. To stay is to be seen. Dozens of names filled the pages, each dated. Some as recent as last month. Others, decades old. He flipped to the final entry. Mira Kelsey, October 11, 1992. And beneath it, in a shakier hand. She's still walking the woods. Julian blinked. A joke, probably. An old guest being creepy for fun. Still, he signed his name beneath it. Julian Price, April 3, 2025. The pen felt too cold, like it had been left outside overnight. Suddenly, the wind outside picked up, whistling through the pine trees and rattling the window panes. Julian glanced at the tree line. One figure. Briefly visible between the trunks. Gone when he looked back. That night, Julian lit a fire in the hearth, more for the comfort of the light than the warmth. He cooked a simple dinner, canned soup and toast, and tried to settle into the stillness. The cabin, with its high ceilings and creaky wood, breathed like an old creature. Groans in the floorboards. Pops in the walls. Outside, the fog thickened until it pressed right up against the windows, like a living thing trying to peek in. He sat in the loft bed, reading an old book he found tucked behind the couch. It was a journal, blank except for a single page near the middle. At Hollow Pines, you are never truly alone. That is the point. That is the price. Julian set it aside. He turned off the lamp. And the footsteps began. Soft at first. On the gravel outside. Crunch, pause, crunch. He sat up in bed, heart quickening. The sound was rhythmic, slow. Deliberate. Someone was walking around the cabin. He moved to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. The porch was empty. The trees beyond stood still. But the footsteps continued, circling now, brushing against the wood siding, then retreating into the fog. After several minutes, the sound stopped. Julian backed away, trying to convince himself it was an animal. He climbed back into bed. And as he lay there, eyes wide open, he thought he saw a shadow move across the wall, though nothing stood between him and the fire but empty air. Morning came gray and dull. Sunlight filtered weakly through the fog, casting a muted glow over the trees. Julian woke with a start, not from a nightmare, but from silence. He didn't remember falling asleep. He couldn't even remember dreaming. He made coffee on the gas stove and stepped outside onto the porch. The air was colder than before. The gravel path he'd driven up was now veiled by mist so thick, it looked like he was suspended in cloud. The forest felt too quiet. That's when he noticed something strange. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not his. They circled the cabin in tight loops, pressed deep into the damp earth, as though someone had walked in slow, endless spirals during the night. He crouched to inspect them. Barefoot. Adult-sized. The toes pointed inward, unnaturally. Maybe it was me, he muttered, not believing it for a second. Back inside, he picked up the guest book again. This time, he flipped back through earlier entries, reading the little notes left behind. Felt something brush my leg under the bed. No pets allowed, right? Heard a knock on the roof, but no trees above. Didn't sleep. Something whispered my name through the vent. Julian shut the book and turned to look at the fireplace. Someone had added a log. The fire was burning again. He hadn't lit it. Julian spent most of the afternoon trying to rationalize what was happening. He examined the fireplace, convinced maybe the log had caught an ember from the night before. But it was no use. The log was new, freshly split, and it hadn't been there that morning. Someone had been in the cabin. Or, someone had never left. Later, while brushing his teeth in the bathroom, Julian noticed something off about the mirror above the sink. It was older than the rest of the furnishings, framed in tarnished silver, its surface uneven like warped glass. As he leaned closer, the reflection shifted. Just for a second. Behind him, in the mirror, a figure stood in the doorway. He spun around. Nothing. Heart hammering, he looked back into the mirror. His reflection stared back, alone. But something was changing. A faint outline began to form beside him in the glass. A tall, blurred shape. It didn't move, didn't speak, but it leaned closer, as if to whisper into his ear. Julian backed away, bumping into the wall. Then the mirror cracked. A fine, hairline fracture ran across the glass like a scar, splitting his reflection in half. He left the bathroom light on when he closed the door. The whisper returned that night, soft and low, as if coming from beneath the bed. Don't sleep too deep. The hollow ones know. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floorboards. He hadn't slept, not really. Maybe an hour, maybe two. Every time his eyes closed, he heard that voice again, curling up from under the mattress or whispering against the window panes. The fog outside hadn't lifted. In fact, it was denser now. He couldn't even see the tree line from the porch. The forest had swallowed the road entirely. He tried to use his phone. Still no signal. He even climbed onto a chair and held it up to the window, hoping for a flicker of service. Nothing. Julian decided to walk the perimeter again, to follow the footprints. He put on boots and a jacket, grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The prints were still there, barefoot, slightly deeper now, as if whoever, or whatever, had walked the loop again during the night. This time, Julian followed them into the woods. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand as he stepped over roots and fallen branches. The trees grew impossibly close together. The deeper he walked, the quieter it became, until he could no longer hear even his own footsteps, only his breathing. Then he saw them. Figures. 5 of them. Standing still between the trees. They weren't walking. They weren't moving. They were watching. Julian ducked behind a trunk, heart pounding. He dared to peek again. The figures hadn't moved. But now, there were 6. He didn't wait. He sprinted back to the cabin, not caring how loud his boots sounded, not looking behind him. When he slammed the door shut and locked it, he realized something chilling. The front mat, previously blank, now had 3 words stitched into it. "You are seen." Julian stayed inside for the rest of the day. He pushed the couch in front of the front door. It didn't make him feel better. The shadows inside the cabin were starting to behave strangely. When he passed through the hallway, they shifted, stretching longer than they should, bending around corners he hadn't turned. It was like they knew where he was going before he did. And the whispers were no longer just at night. They came from the vents, the fireplace, and worst of all, from behind the walls. Faint voices, some muttering nonsense, others repeating his name like a lullaby. "Julian. Julian, are you still awake?" He tried to record the sounds with his phone, but playback only gave static. Later that evening, he noticed a tiny draft coming from the wall beside the stairs. Curious, he pressed his hand against the wooden paneling. It was loose. He pried it away and revealed a narrow crawlspace behind it. Dust spiraled in the flashlight beam. And there, carved deep into the inner wall, were hundreds of tiny eyes. Dozens on every surface. Childlike etchings, primitive and frantic. Some had names scrawled beneath them. Others had no irises. Just hollow circles. Julian's name was there too. Julian Price, scratched faintly into the wood below a pair of blank eyes. His breath caught in his throat. He staggered back and bumped into the desk. A single photo fell from the wall above it, a black and white image of a family from decades ago. Man, woman, child. Smiling. But as he stared closer, he noticed something in the background. A face. Hidden in the shadows of the trees. The same one he'd seen in the mirror. Watching. Julian didn't eat that night. Every creak of the cabin felt too loud. The shadows seemed to swell against the corners, pressing inward. He turned every light on, even the old reading lamp in the loft that buzzed faintly. Still, the darkness felt alive, slithering through the air like smoke. He kept returning to the crawlspace behind the wall. He wanted to believe he imagined the carving of his name. But each time he looked, it was still there, etched deeply, unmistakably. And then, sometime past midnight, came the voice. It rose up from beneath the floorboards, low and distant at first, like someone humming a song underwater. Then words. Clear. Crisp. "Come down, Julian." He froze. The voice sounded just below the floor, directly beneath the rug near the fireplace. He pulled it aside and found a square of wood, cut neatly and nailed shut. A trapdoor. He hesitated. But the voice continued, now gentler. "I'm so lonely down here. You said you wanted silence. This is where silence lives." Julian grabbed a fire poker, pried the nails loose, and slowly opened the door. A black stairwell led into the earth. He stood there, light trembling in his grip. The air from below smelled of pine needles and old stone. And something else. Soil. Like a freshly dug grave. He didn't go down. He shut the door, hammered the nails back in, and placed the heaviest thing he could find on top. The voice went quiet. But when he turned around, all the lights in the cabin were off. Except one. The lamp in the loft. It was rocking gently, back and forth. And on the bed beneath it lay a bundle of dried pine branches twisted into the shape of a sleeping body. Julian didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat in the loft, staring down at the twisted pine figure lying in his bed. Its head was shaped from overlapping twigs bound tightly with something pale and brittle, hair, he thought. Real hair. Human. He didn't touch it. By dawn, the fog outside had lightened just enough for him to see the closest trees again. And that's when he noticed something new. One of the massive black pines just beyond the porch had changed. Its bark was slick and cracked, like dried flesh. Long scratches ran down its trunk in looping circles, and symbols had been carved into its base, spirals, crosses, and eye shapes. But what made Julian step back from the window in horror was the face. Not carved. Grown. A human face stretched out of the bark, mouth open in a soundless scream, eyes shut as if forever mid-blink. It was pale, like bone, and weeping sap from its corners. He ran outside. Rain began to fall, pattering gently at first. The air smelled of stone and resin. Julian moved cautiously toward the tree, his boots sinking into the mossy ground. The face was real. He reached out to touch it, and the eyes snapped open. He stumbled back, slipping on the wet pine needles. A voice echoed in his head, not from the tree, not from his ears. She roots herself in the ones who linger. The longer you stay, the deeper she drinks. Julian crawled backward away from the tree and didn't stop until he was back inside the cabin, soaked and shaking. He checked the guest book again, hoping for answers. But all the names were gone. Every page was blank. Except the last one. It no longer said, Julian Price. It said, Julian Pine. Julian lit every candle he could find. The lights were unreliable now, bulbs flickering, dimming without burning out. Shadows pooled where there shouldn't be shadows, creeping along the ceiling, stretching their limbs across the wooden floor. The cabin no longer felt like a building. It felt like a mouth. He stayed near the fireplace, the warmth his only comfort, though the logs burned slower than they should. Hours passed in long stretches of silence. Then, just after sunset, came a knock at the front door. 3 sharp taps. Knock. 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 Julian didn't move. The knock came again. Slower. Heavier. Knock. 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 And then, quietly, sweetly, a voice. Julian, it's Mira. I need help. Please, let me in. He stepped to the peephole with trembling hands. A woman stood just beyond the porch light, her form half swallowed by the fog. She wore a dress soaked in rain, hair limp against her shoulders. Her eyes, they looked wrong. They didn't blink. They shimmered, glassy and still, as if painted on her face. Julian knew that name. Mira Kelsey. The last guest in the book before him. Dated 1992. He backed away. The woman's voice changed, hollow and low. You signed the book. You belong to her now. Julian ran upstairs. He slammed the loft door shut and shoved the dresser in front of it. Downstairs, the knocking turned to banging. Then scratching. Nails dragging across the wood. Not just at the front door, all around. Windows, walls, even the roof. And worse, he could hear several voices now. All whispering different names. Some weeping. Some laughing. He sat on the floor, knees to his chest, hands over his ears. But nothing could drown them out. From just outside the door came a final voice. Calm. Familiar. It was his own. Let me in, Julian. I'm already inside. Julian froze. His breath hitched as the voice slithered through the thin walls, crawling under the floorboards, wrapping around his chest like cold chains. It wasn't just the front door anymore, it was everywhere. Inside his head, inside the room, inside him. The dresser scraped again, harder this time. The loft door trembled under the weight of something unseen pushing against it. Julian scrambled back to the window, heart pounding so loud he was sure it could be heard outside. He peered out, the fog swallowing the porch light whole. The silhouette was gone. But the whispering didn't stop. Julian. Julian. He clutched the candle, but the flame guttered, flickered, and died. Darkness roared in. Suddenly, the room felt impossibly cold. The wooden beams above groaned and twisted as if the house itself was breathing, alive. Julian's reflection shimmered in the glass of the window. But it wasn't quite right. His eyes were vacant, a dark hollow where the light should be. The whisper came again, this time from behind him. "I've been waiting." He spun around. There she was. Mira, stepping through the wall like a shadow made flesh. Her eyes locked on his, those unblinking, glassy eyes, pulling at something inside him. Julian screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thickening darkness. "Welcome home, Julian." And the cabin's mouth closed shut. The last flicker of candlelight vanished. Story 2. The rain hammered against the windshield as Leah's car crawled up the narrow mountain road. Mist clung thick to the pine trees, swallowing everything beyond a few feet of visibility. The sky was a dull gray, swollen with storm clouds that threatened more than just rain. She pulled the collar of her jacket tighter around her neck and glanced at the GPS. "Almost there," she muttered. Behind the wheel, Leah felt the tension growing in her shoulders. The last few days had been a blur of emails, phone calls, and restless nights. This cabin, an old rental tucked away deep in the Cedar Hollow forest, was supposed to be a refuge. A place to write, to breathe, to escape the noise of the city. But now, sitting in the creeping fog, every shadow seemed to whisper secrets she didn't want to hear. She took the next sharp turn, then the next, the tires crunching over loose gravel. Suddenly, the headlights caught a flicker of something on the side of the road. A figure, motionless, pale, and soaked through. Leah slammed on the brakes, heart leaping. She threw the car door open, rain pelting her face. The figure was a man, drenched, his clothes torn and smeared with dirt. His eyes were wide and wild, darting around as if hunted. "Please, help me," he gasped. Leah hesitated. The forest around them was eerily silent, save for the storm. She reached out, gripping his arm. "Are you okay? What happened?" He shook his head, trembling. It's not safe here. You shouldn't come." "What? Who? What's going on?" Leah demanded, but the man's eyes darted past her, and he pulled away. "Go back," he whispered. "Before it finds you." Before she could ask more, he turned and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the fog. Leah stood alone on the slick road, the rain soaking through her jacket. A chill ran down her spine, not from the cold, but something deeper. Something watching. She climbed back into the car, shaking her head. Just nerves, she told herself. Just a story. But as the headlights pierced the mist once more, Leah's eyes caught something etched into a nearby tree, a symbol she didn't recognize. A jagged spiral, carved deep into the bark. And beneath it, smeared in dark red, a word, "Stay." Leah's fingers trembled as she stared at the blood-red word carved into the tree. The rain seemed to hush for a moment, the forest holding its breath. She forced herself to turn away and finish the drive, telling herself it was just some sick prank. But something deep inside her wouldn't let go of the warning. The cabin emerged from the fog like a specter, old, weathered with stained by time, windows dark and staring. Leah parked and grabbed her bag, heart hammering. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp pine. The only sound was the drip of water leaking somewhere in the ceiling. The walls seemed to close in, shadows pooling in corners like waiting creatures. Leah flicked on the small lamp by the fireplace, the weak glow barely pushing back the darkness. She unpacked, shaking off the unease, and settled at the wooden table with her laptop. But the keys felt heavy beneath her fingers, her mind too distracted to write. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, barely a tap, then more urgent. Leah froze. "Hello?" she called, voice shaky. No answer. The knocking moved from the front door to the windows, circling the cabin like an unseen predator. Leah's breath caught in her throat. She approached the window, peered through the rain-streaked glass. Nothing. Just the trees, swaying in the wind, and the creeping fog. She tried to convince herself it was the storm, or an animal, but a slow, crawling dread settled in her chest. The laptop screen flickered and died. Darkness pressed in. Leah reached for her phone. No signal. A sudden, low moan rose outside. Then a voice, soft, pleading, carried on the wind. "Help me. Please." Leah's heart stopped. She turned to the door. The knocking resumed, louder, frantic. Summoning every ounce of courage, she flung the door open. Nothing but empty blackness and rain. Then, just beyond the porch light, a figure appeared. A woman, soaked and pale, eyes wide and glassy like the man on the road. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Leah slammed the door, locking it with shaking hands. The woman's voice seeped through the walls now, a chorus of voices whispering names Leah didn't know. They spoke of loss, of betrayal, of revenge. The floorboards creaked beneath Leah's feet as cold fingers brushed her ankles. She stumbled back, falling into the arms of the ghostly woman. "Stay," she hissed, voice like ice. The cabin trembled. Walls warped and groaned as shadows danced across the ceiling, weaving into faces twisted in pain and rage. Leah's vision blurred. The voices crescendoed in a deafening roar. And then, silence. Leah awoke outside, drenched in rain, the cabin gone as if swallowed by the forest. In her hand was a tattered notebook. The cover read simply, "Cedar Hollow." Opening it, Leah found pages filled with stories, of guests who came seeking peace, who never left. And at the very end, a fresh line in red ink. "Welcome to the story, Leah." Story 3. Evan's footsteps echoed in the empty halls of the old hotel. The Grand Marlowe was a relic of a forgotten era, its once grand chandeliers dulled by years of dust and neglect. He had come to document its history for a local magazine, but already the building felt less like a structure and more like a living thing watching him. "Hello?" Evan called, voice bouncing off cracked wallpaper and peeling paint. Only silence answered. The front desk was littered with faded keys and torn brochures. A brass bell sat tarnished, begging for a single ring. As he made his way down the main corridor, the heavy scent of mildew and aged wood pressed in. Doors lined both sides, most hanging slightly ajar, revealing dark rooms that swallowed light whole. Evan paused at room 217, the door marked with a brass number almost worn away. A chill ran up his spine. A soft creak echoed behind him. He spun around. No one. He shrugged and pulled out his camera, snapping photos of the ornate molding and faded wallpaper. Suddenly, a faint whisper drifted through the air. "Evan." His heart pounded. The voice was close, too close, but no one was in sight. He moved toward the sound, down a narrow service corridor with pipes snaking along the ceiling. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a tangled web of voices pleading, laughing, crying. A door at the end of the hallway stood closed but not locked. Evan pushed it open. Inside was a small room, bare except for a cracked mirror hanging crooked on the wall. His reflection stared back, but something was wrong, his eyes looked tired, hollow. From behind the mirror came a low scratching, like nails on wood. Evan reached out, heart racing, and touched the glass. The mirror rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. Before he could pull back, a cold hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with an iron grip. "Stay," a voice hissed. Evan yanked free, stumbling backward as the mirror's surface cracked, spiderwebbing across its frame. He ran down the hall, the whispers chasing him, twisting into threats. "Don't leave us. Finish the story. Join us." He burst into the lobby, gasping for breath. The grand chandelier flickered and then went dark, plunging the hotel into pitch black. Evan fumbled for his flashlight. The beam caught dozens of faces, ghostly apparitions of guests long dead, their eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. "Why are you here?" a woman's voice wailed. "To remember," Evan whispered. The ghosts closed in, their forms blurring and shifting. Suddenly, a hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around, heart in his throat. An old man stood there, pale and trembling. "You must leave," the man said, voice cracking. "This place, it traps souls. Once you hear the whispers, you belong to the hotel." Evan backed away, but the whispers grew louder, suffocating. He bolted through the front doors into the night air, the hotel's facade looming behind him like a beast watching its prey flee. Safe outside, Evan looked back once. The Grand Marlowe's windows seemed to pulse, like eyes blinking awake. And in the silence, a whisper followed him home. "See you soon, Evan."